April 12th, 2001. My name is Jerome Ferry. My cameraman is Alan Eggers. We're doing an oral interview with Harold Hall, who was an early aviator in Linn County. Harold, when and where were you born?
I was born and raised in Onslow, Iowa.
Onslow's a small town
Down east of Annaposa, north of Wyoming.
Who were your folks?
My dad's name was Albert, they called him Bert, and my mother's name was Jessie.
Did you have any brothers and sisters?
Oh, I had, yes, two brothers. Dylan, of course, was the oldest in our family, and then I had a sister, Bernice, she was next, and then myself, and then Brother Gordon.
So you were born and raised on a farm?
Well, not on the farm, just
in a farming community?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you have a lot of fond memories of growing up?
Oh, yes, you bet. See, that you knew everyone in the area, you knew everyone in the Wyoming and Center Junction and all around, you knew everyone then. It was a nice area to be raised and grow up in, for sure.
Do you remember the Depression? Did you know it as a depression, or did you?
Oh, did I ever? See, I was born in 1914, and my folks had lost everything they had when the banks closed, and everything went bottoms up. They lost a 160-acre farm and all the money that they had in the bank, and we absolutely knew what the Depression was. So we just didn't have much of anything for quite some time.
But did you, how old would you have been? You had been probably 15, 16 years old at that time in the 29, 30s?
Well, yes, of course, you see, in 29 I would have been 15 years old. Mm-hmm.
So anything you had at that particular time at that age, you probably had to earn it yourself because your dad wasn't in a position where he could give you a whole lot of stuff.
Well, that's true. See, my father was in the livery business. See, by the time I was born, he was in the livery business. We had a great big old livery barn, and he met all the trains with his dray wagon and hauled things to the stores from there, And he also had a surrey where salesmen would come in on the passenger train and they'd get off, and then necessarily he would take them to Center Junction or Wyoming, with the team in the surrey. That's where that umbrella came in. Remember I told you about that umbrella and my parachuting experience?
Okay. Well, we're jumping ahead a little bit, but I know growing up like that and with brothers, what were some of the crazy stunts you and your brother probably did your folks didn't know about?
Well, there was so many of those I just couldn't even think about. Of course, I'll back up a ways because my older brother and my sister were just exactly the way my folks wanted them to be. And then I came along, and that was different. And my younger brother, he says to me, "Boy, you sure made it easy for me." Yeah, we used to have quite a time.
You were, there wasn't anything different about you. You were just on the cutting edge, where your brother was more or less, like you said, like your folks wanted him to be.
Well, that's what they was. They just wanted us to be like, and my older brother and sister was just exactly the way they wanted them to be, and then I just was different. That was all.
Tell us about some of the things that probably got you and your brother in trouble with your folks.
Well, that was just so easy for anything. I just can't put my finger on anything certain, but we was always in trouble.
You had mentioned the umbrella.
On that parachuting?
Yes.
You wanted to hear about that?
Yes.
Well, like I said, my father had this livery business, this great big old livery barn, and in that barn, well, matter of fact, back in that barn, somewhere along the line, somebody had been building an airplane, and there was an old fuselage. It was uncovered, and there was an engine on it and a propeller, and that's all there was as far as that old airplane was concerned. But anyway, my younger brother and I, we were rummaging around the barn one day, and back in the back we found a great big umbrella. And back in those days, that's what my dad had when he put on that Surrey, and this big umbrella was advertising. It had advertising all around it. And I opened that thing up and I said to Gordy, you know, this would make a parachute. Well, let's try it. And so we took it, went back down home, and we crawled up on the edge of the barn and jumped off the edge of the barn. Everything went fine. Went up a little further and jumped off. Everything went fine. Then we went out of the haymow door. Everything went fine. I said, now we're going to the top. So we went to the top, and I'm up there straddling that kid, and I said, well, here I go. And I went out into space, and when I went through by the haymow door, she turned wrong side out. I'm still living to tell the story, but it was a little doubtful there for a while whether I was going to make it or not.
Did you have a tendency like, well, like I did when your folks would be away from the farm, or you would think of a lot of these experiences or a lot of these experiments that you'd tried?
Oh, sure, it was. I don't know. I'm thinking of one time when my younger brother and I, happened to be upstairs, and the old boy that plowed the garden, he had just plowed it and dragged it, and you know, that dirt was real soft, and we were sitting there in the window, and I said, you know, if we could jump down there into that soft dirt, wouldn't hurt a thing. And he said, well, go ahead, do it. Well, I said, no, you might just, well, no, so I just pushed him out. And when he hit the ground down there, his knees came up and under his chin and just knocked him cold in the cucumber. And about that time, my mother knew something was going on. She came around the corner of the house, and of course there was another thrashing, and that got good.
Did you think your folks were strict?
Oh, sure, that's what we thought.
Yeah.
But something like that, as you grow older, you realize it was all benefits.
Part of life, yeah.
I wasn't thinking about that then.
How about country school? Did you go to country school?
No, we had high school there in town. Went to school.
How about when you lived out in the country? Did you have a creek nearby that you?
Oh,
went
there was
to?
a little creek that went down by.
Spent many fine hours.
Oh yeah, we tried to fish, you know, and this, that, and another thing. Yeah.
When did you first, as a boy, become or have your first exposure to airplanes?
Well, when we lived in the acreage just to the north of town, I don't remember the year, but anyway, my older brother, he had a lookout up in a big old pine tree. And this was after the war, of course, and the barnstormers would come around, you know, and there was a couple of old biplanes flew around town there, and pretty soon they landed. And so my older brother, he scooted up that lookout, he called it, and yeah, he said they just landed over there in French's pasture. And so we say, come on, Dad, get us over there. So Dad says, okay. And as we were driving out, my mother says, now, Bert Hall, you keep those kids away from those airplanes. Sure. So we get over there, and they wanted to give airplane rides for $5 a piece. Well, $5 a piece, you know, for 4 kids, $20. Dad didn't have that much money. But they weren't getting any business, and so finally my dad went over to one of the fellows, and he said, I'll tell you what. He said, if you'll take 2 of my kids for $5, he said, that'll at least get something going here. Why, he said, we'll do that. So the fellow finally said, okay. So he took us 4 kids for 2 for $5, and he got some business started. And we didn't any more than drive in the driveway when we got home, and my mother came out there and she said, I know it, I could just tell it. She said, but everything went fine.
How old were you at that time?
Oh golly, I don't know. We were small and young, where we got 2 of us got in the seat up there where normally one person would sit, and so I haven't any idea how old I was then.
It made quite an impression on you, though.
Oh, sure it did. You bet.
Did you know of Charles Lindbergh?
Oh, knew of him.
You knew of him? of what he accomplished. And
Oh, sure. Another thing I remember telling you about Dan Hunter flying down to Onslow with Howard Hall. See, Howard was born and raised there too. And he landed in a pasture right there in town, practically. And Mrs. Lamy was a relative of Howard's, and that's the reason they came down there, was to take her for her first airplane ride. And they got that accomplished. And of course, that was really exciting, and I'd always thought that was something that I would like to do. Yeah. But couldn't, no way in the world could I afford to take flying lessons or anything like that.
What did you do when you finally left the farm as far as a job was concerned?
Well, I tell you what, the first job I had was driving a truck hauling stock to Chicago. And that lasted a while, and then I went to work for a seed company called McNeely Hybrid Seed Corn Company at Center Junction and Maquoketa and Shenandoah. And most of my work there was driving a truck all over the country, delivering seed and the likes of that.
Did you just work at this seed place, or did you have own this seed business at one time, or?
Oh no, I just was an employee.
Just an employee there.
Mr. McNeely owned the business.
So how old would you have been when you first got serious about flying?
Well, that was what, about 1940, so I would have been, 26? And thinking about it. And then they came up with this civilian pilot training program. It was called CPT, out at the airport in junction with Cole College.
Cole College.
Well, you know Pat DeBelvis, of course. And Pat was an instructor out there. And he talked to us about it. Another fellow by the name of Bill Thompson, a good friend of Pat's and mine. And he said, why don't you fellas, he said, you've always been interested in flying. He said, why don't you come up? He said, I'll give you a flight demonstration, see how you handle the airplane, and this, that, and another thing. And then if you're interested, we would have to enlist in the Air Force Reserve and go to school at Cole and fly at the airport. And so we decided we'd give that a shot. We took the flight, and Pat says, you're naturals as far as flying is concerned. So it's up to you if you want to do it. And so we decided we'd give it a try. And we went over to Cornell College and took the tests that was necessary and passed them. And so then we were in the Air Force Reserve taking that flight training out there. And the flight training then started in 42.
In that flight training, was there any government inspectors that would come on the spur of the moment and ask for a ride with the student?
FA, or well, it was CA then. The CA fellow, that fat DeBelvis probably scared the living daylights out of me one day. He said, I came taxiing in solo. And he came out with a fellow with him, and he opened up the door and he said, Harold, I want you to take this fellow for a ride. I said, are you crazy, man? I'm just a student pilot. I can't take anybody for a ride. And he said, well, this is Paul Canham. He's a CAA flight inspector. And I said, oh? Yeah, he said, he wants you to take him for a ride. So we're taxiing out. I'm doing a little shaking and this, that, and another thing. And I said, do you mean to tell me that I could flunk this flight test and it'd be all over with? He said, well, yeah, but he said, don't worry about it. He said, I don't think anything like that's going to happen. I thought, oh, God. But I took him for a ride, and we got back, and he said everything was okay. And you know, that was when I took that ride as a student pilot when I got my flight instructor's rating, we had to fly to Des Moines to get the flight check for flight instructor's rating. And I got over there that day and got everything all squared away, and in he walks to give me a flight check for a flight instructor's rating. And everything went just fine. Yeah.
Did you know Dan Hunter Sr.
Oh,
personally?
You bet.
What type of a man was he? Was he?
Well, he was quite a man. He was quite a rounder too, you know. I mean, he liked to have a drink now and then and play poker and shoot crap and what have you. But he was a good guy. Oh yeah.
You could what do you I want to say? You could kid around with the guy and.
Oh sure.
Yeah.
You bet. He was well liked. Real well liked. Of course, it was a bad impression that was made on a lot of people when he and Jim Wathen split, because you see, Jim was a part owner of the flying service out there, and things just didn't. When it came to parting of the ways, it wasn't the way it should have been. He kind of rooped Jim out of much. But it was probably one of the best things that happened to Jim, because he went to Florida and flew for a company down there for a couple of years, and then Don Hines was chairman of the airport commission at that time. He got a hold of Jim and talked him into coming up to the municipal and starting a flying service, which was probably the best thing that ever happened to Jim.
Dan Jr. Did you know Dan Jr. His boy? Was he also flew? Was he a pilot?
Yes, he was a pilot.
Yeah. I understand that Dan, in the early years, that Dan was involved in quite a few other things in order to make a go of it.
Well, he had made a go. Of course, this flight training program that they had, the CPT, and then different programs carried on after that. And he did well there. And then, you know, he had that Kaiser Fraser automobile dealership, you know, and the likes. I don't know whether that made them a lot of money or not, but they seem to do well.
You had mentioned Pat Drybilbus. I understand you had become friends over the years.
Well, you see, we were practically born and raised together. He lived at Center Junction, and that's just a few miles apart. We always played basketball against each other and the likes, you know. And I knew his wife real well, Crystal Stoffel. She was the daughter of the dentist at Wyoming. Of course, we didn't have one in Onslow, but Wyoming's only 3. I could tell you a little deal there about my father. I came home from school one morning, and then I walked. The folks had a store then at that time, a grocery store. Well, my mother wanted to know what I said, man, my tooth, I didn't have a toothache. But I said, my tooth is just killing me. I said, and the teacher said I might just well go home because I wasn't any good there. About that time, my dad comes around and wants to know what's wrong. And, I got this horrible, well, come on. We'll over to Doc Stoffel. We'll get that taken care of. I said, no, it'll be okay. We don't need to worry about that. He said, come on. And he just took me and put me in the car, and we drive over to Wyoming. Doc Stoffel's office was upstairs there, and we walked up the stairs and walked in, and Doc says, well, Bert and Harold, what can I do for you fellas? My dad says, this boy has a tooth that has to be pulled. Well, Doc said, now don't you think I should determine whether the tooth should be pulled or not? My dad says, he has a tooth that's got to be pulled, and he just picked me up and set me in the chair. And so Doc checked my teeth, and Doc said, Bert, there's nothing wrong with his teeth. They're all okay. My dad says, you see that tooth right there? Pull it. And he was a big man, and Doc knew he meant what he was saying. So I wound up with a tooth that I didn't need to be pulled, but it was gone. I never had a toothache after that. That was some of the things that I learned the hard way, you know. But I wasn't missing school for sure anymore.
In talking to Pat Drybilbus, he was talking about when he got married, him and his wife. Of course, it'd be him and his wife.
We did a job on it.
They during the service in the church, he said that somebody kept buzzing the church.
That was us.
And he said the noise was so loud you couldn't hear the music, you couldn't hear the preacher, you couldn't hear anything. and he often wondered who that possibly could have been buzzing the church.
He knew who it was. There wasn't any question about that. I think there was about 5 airplanes, and of course we knew. And they let me be kind of one of the leaders because I knew just exactly where the place was, where the church was, and everything. And so we were flying. I was still in training then, but my instructor and we were flying an open cockpit job, and this is in the middle of the winter, and it was just cold and bloody blazes. And so we get down there, and we knew the time of the wedding, and so we got all ready, and then we did one right after the other, right over the roof of that church. And Pat said that some woman just got up to sing, and she just let out one big screech, and practically collapsed right there. And then we made a couple of trips over there, and then we left. But we had fun while we were doing it.
Was this after the start of the war? Or prior to World War II?
Yeah, it was during. That was in 1942. Yeah, it had to be because earlier it was in the winter. Remember the fire was in first part of January of '43, and we were flying those open cockpit jobs. When we got back from Wyoming to the field, the instructor says to me, he said, "Do you think you can land this thing?" I said, "Why?" He said, "I'm froze." And I said, "Well, just a minute. I'll see if I can move my feet." And I wasn't sure I could move my feet, but they worked. And so we got her on the ground all right.
You mentioned the fire at Hunter Airport. Were you around at that time?
All of us, including Jim, was at the Y in the pool because the weather was bad and we weren't flying. And so I don't remember who, somebody from the Y there came and said, "Maybe you fellas would like to know that there's a heck of a fire out at the airport." And of course we bailed out right away and went out there, but there wasn't anything anybody could do. It was way out of control long before that. And so we lost, oh golly, it seems to me like there was about 19, 20 airplanes that was lost, maybe more in that fire, because all of our trainers was in that big hangar, and they used to stack them, up like this, and so that we could get a lot of them in there. And and a couple of the biplanes were gone. And after that fire, then they transferred us to Clarion, and that's where we finished
To finish your training.
Finished the training as far as the flying aerobatics and the likes of that was concerned. And then went to Des Moines from there for cross country, and Youngstown, Ohio for instrument training and the likes.
Do you recall of anybody finding the true cause of the fire?
Oh yeah. See, Pops Buis was in charge of maintenance, and I don't know that he was handling the torch, but they were welding in that little building next to the hangar there, which was a shop also, and a spark from the welding. Of course, that the fabric and the likes on those airplanes was combustible, and man, just like that, the whole airplane, the fuselage of that airplane was on fire, and it spread from there to the big hangar.
Must have been a very hot fire.
Yeah, it was.
So after you finished your training, Harold, did you serve in the military? Did you have to go overseas or?
No, after we were inducted into active service, and we went to Youngstown, Ohio for instrument training, and then to Chanute, Kansas for instructors training. I needed 3 flying hours to finish the program and get my commission, and they closed the program. Somebody came out with an order, and that's it. There were people up there on their final check ride, and if they didn't beat the time, they were done. And so then they sent us to basic training all over again, then to a B-17, B-29 mechanic school. And after that, well, we were a disgruntled group anyway, because we weren't getting to fly, and that's what we enlisted for, and the likes, And then they'd also brought in the women pilots by that time, and they were training them to do the same things that we were supposed to be trained to do. And so finally they decided that it would be a good idea maybe if they just discharged us. And I was, of course, I had an option of becoming a glider pilot, and that was just a one-way ride, and I didn't want any part of that. And so I took the discharge.
I understand that Dan Hunter had a glider training school
In Texas.
in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
What in the name Spencer, Iowa keeps popping up.
Well, no, Spencer, that did. That might have been the glider school. He did have a school down in Texas, Vernon, Texas, I believe it was. I don't know whether he had gliders down there or not, but I think he did have gliders up at Spencer. Yeah.
Saxon Field. Did you ever fly in and out of Saxon?
Yes, just a time or two.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Ted Saxon was the
He was the owner-operator.
owner-operator of it out on Blair's Ferry Road.
But then Art Craning and Maynard Bartling went over there and had an operation over there.
With the government?
No, this
just
was
an operation.
after that. Mm-hmm. And Maynard Bartling, Art flew for Otto Cole for quite some time after the war. And Maynard had the Butterfly Cafe down there on 3rd Avenue. Yeah.
After you got your license, Harold, did you ever have the opportunity to give any of your family members a ride in the plane?
Oh yeah, all of them. Of course, my father was gone, and even my mother, and I couldn't get her close to an airplane. Man, I'm telling you, when I went to the service, and then my younger brother, he went into the Air Corps, and that just worried the devil out of her, you know. But anyway, my older brother lived over on 3rd Avenue, and we were over there one evening, and my mother was there. We were sitting out on the porch. And the next day, she was going up to Algona, where my younger brother was the president of the bank up there. She just loved to ride a bus. She really did. She'd just get on a bus and she could ride forever. And it was hotter than the blazes, you know. And I was trying to tell her, Mom, why don't you let me fly you up there? I said, man, I can get you up there in less than an hour. It's going to take you all day on that stinking old hot bus. Oh, no, Harold, she said, no, I don't think I want to get in one of those airplanes to go anywhere. And I finally said to her, well, why not, Mom? Well, she said, I couldn't get in one of those things. Oh, I said, well, if you could get in one of them, would you? Well, sure. I said, okay. I just got up and I went over to her and I said, well, come on, what do you mean? I said, I'm going to help you out. We're going out to the airport. Oh, no, we're not. Well, she was a lady that wouldn't go back on her word, and I just told her, I said, you just told me if you could get in one of those airplanes, you would do it. I want to show you how easy it is to get in and out of that airplane. Oh, she took a big old sigh. She got up, and we went to the airport, and I got her in and out of the airplane. I said, no, that wasn't too bad, was it? She said, no, but I'm not going. And I said, oh, yes, you are, because you said if you could get in the airplane that you would go. So she decided that she would go. Well, we had the most beautiful ride, just as smooth and everything, you know. And she always liked the lakes, Okoboji and Clear Lake, and they used to go up there quite often. I couldn't even get her to look outside of the airplane. She didn't look out for takeoff or nothing. She just sit there, and she wasn't about to look, and I tried to get her, look out, Mom. Oh. So we got up there near the lake, and I just happened to think, and I said, hey, Mom, right over there is Clear Lake. And I said, you always loved the lakes. I said, you'd like to see that from the air. So I flew over there, and I said, now, look, I'm going to make a little bank here. I said, you just look. And she looked out. Well, that was good. She saw that, and everything was fine, yeah. Well, we get over to Algona, and right by, near my brother's home, was a couple of elevators. And when we got there, near there, I said, Mom, now you see the elevators down there? Yeah. And I said, well, then you can see Gordy's house right over there. Yeah. Well, just about that time we were in a bank taking a look. I hit the darndest bump you ever did see out of a clear blue sky that had just been perfect. Just scared her to death. And I'm telling you, she was in the back seat with my wife, and she told her because she was screaming and crying and just carrying off something awful. Well, we landed at the airport, and of course my brother was there to meet us, and we got her out. Now I said, now Mom, the first thing you have to do is get down and kiss the earth, because you're here safely and you got to do that too. I'll be damned. But she said, I'll tell you one thing, you'll never get me in one of those things again. And that was it. There was no more right there.
What was that? An air pocket, you suppose, that you hit?
Oh, well, it just happens, you know.
Did it drop? The plane dropped?
Well, it either dropped or up or what, but it was just enough of a bump that it didn't startle me, but it sure startled her. Either updrafts and downdrafts, you know.
You forgot to tell her ahead of time that there could possibly be.
Oh, if I'd have told her that,
she wouldn't have went.
No.
Did you continue your flying career throughout your lifetime, Harold?
Oh, yeah, when I'll tell you what, Jim Wathen and we were real good friends, and he had to give us several flight checks, and he always told me how well I could fly that airplane. And he told me one day, he said, now when this is all over, if you want to stay in the aviation business, he said, I'll promise you a job. Well, I thought that was good. So when I got discharged, I come home, and it wasn't long, my draft board was going to send me back to the walking army. And I said, what the heck you mean? Well, they said, we're short of people. You're healthy and available. You've already been there. I said, yes, but I enlisted in that confounded thing to fly, not to go into the walking army. And it was just about that time I get word from the CAA that they're looking for control tower operators and flight service people. And I told them, I said, well, I would like to do something like that, but I said, I can't. Why? I said, because my draft board's going to send me back to the walking army. They said, your draft board doesn't have any control over you, period. They said, you have a 1C classification, and the only person that can touch you is Hershey, that he was the head. And I said, is that a fact? Absolutely, that's a fact. And they told me, they said, you just write these, they told me page numbers and paragraph numbers and everything, take it back to your draft board and tell them they better be getting up on it because they have no control over you. And I did. They apologized and said, that's fine. So then I had to tell then I had taken some tests. Instead of for flight service, I qualified to be a control tower operator. And then I had to get a hold, because they was going to send me to Toledo, Ohio, somewhere off in Cleveland, I guess it was, in Ohio. And then I told him, I said, well, I'll tell you what. I said, I appreciate all you've done for me and everything, but I'm not going. As long as nobody's going to send me back to the Army, I'm going out to the airport and going to work for Jim Wathen. And so I did. And so I stayed there under flying service then. Jim left in 52, I think it was. And I stayed there. We closed that field the last day of May of 58.
Last day of May of 58. That's Hunter, the Hunter Airport.
Yeah, and so then I went over to.
You went over to Jim with Wathen. And how long did you stay with Jim then?
Well, I stayed until we got out of the business. I became the vice president when he incorporated. I became the vice president and the manager of Wathen Flying Service, and we also had the National Car Rental, and I had the same position there. And then we stayed until Jim decided to sell the flying service in the first part of 78. So I was there from 58 until 78.
What was your responsibilities in working for Jim?
Well, besides being the manager, I also did instruction, and I was also a flight examiner, and flew charter, and the likes, just daily operations, so that everything's going well.
Did you fly quite a few charters?
Oh, for years we did a lot of charter
How,
flying.
what was the furthest flight or the longest flight you probably flew a customer?
Oh, like Florida to California, Texas, and as well up into Canada and what have you. It was, we just did wherever the people wanted to go. That's where.
In those days, in working for Watham, you probably had quite a bit of instrumentation in the plane at that time.
Instrument ratings,
Mhm.
multi-engine ratings. Yeah.
Did you know a Robert Ray?
Oh yeah, Bob Ray.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he was wound up the pilot for Iowa Manufacturing.
And Jim Watham, he went out of business in '78. You said.
Yes,
Mhm.
at the time, we kept the car rental, and of course Jim, he went to Florida every winter anyway, because the cold weather and he just didn't get along too well, and he always talked about he gets a sore throat and this, that, and the other thing. We all used to kid him, but he still went to Florida after we got rid of the flying service, and I had that confounded car rental, and we kept that until '81, and I got sick and tired. I was ready to retire anyway, and so I called him one day and I said, I'm going to get rid of the car rental. Oh no, you can't do that. Why? Well, because he said, I always thought I would at least have a business in Cedar Rapids until I was ready to go. And I said, well, I'll tell you, you can do that. How's that? I said, just buy me out. That's all it takes. I'm ready to quit. And so anyway, he said, well, I'll leave that up to you. And I had a real good deal going, I thought, because the head office up in Minneapolis had been down just a short time before that, and it bragged us up how well we were doing and everything. So I just thought, well, heck, I'd give them a call, and they would come down and buy this thing in a hurry. Because we started with 4 cars, and at that time we was running 80-some cars, and so they came down, 3 of them, and they looked the situation all over and went back and said, boy, everything's good. I had everything down, every car and everything, what I wanted for it, and all the equipment and everything, and I had a price down there. And they looked at that, but they didn't make any offers or anything, but they called me within a day or two and offered me half of what I'd asked them. And I said, you gotta be nuts, because that's not going to go, period. Well, if you can get someone that'll pay you more, let us know. We could probably meet the price. I said, you've made your price. You're done. And Bob Zimmerman had told me one time, if we ever decided to get rid of the car rental, would we give him a chance? And I called Bob that afternoon and told him. He said, I'll be right out. Is that okay? I said, sure. And he came right out. We went over it, and I gave him the same figures that I gave the car rental people. Bob says, that doesn't look too bad. Well, I said, you think about it. Yeah, he said, well, I got to get with the auditor and my people, and he said, we'll talk about it. And it wasn't long. He called and wanted to know if he'd come out, and I said, sure. So he came out, and he drew a line through every automobile that I had, and he added more money because he was in the business. And what we did, we took wholesale and retail and split it. That's the way we sold our cars, and we sold all of we had a lot of good customers. And so he wound up giving me more than I even asked him. Yeah.
So at that time then, did you retire then?
Yes.
Did you still have your license? Were you still
Oh yeah.
keeping it up at that time?
I had my license, and I was flying up until December of '86 when I had open heart surgery.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have a heart attack, and I still could pass a physical, but to do that would cost me $2,000 because they got a special deal you have to go through. The FAA does, and so that was the end of my flying right then.
How many hours do you suppose you logged in your career?
Between 16,000 and 17,000.
16, 17,000. I often wondered, in all of those hours of flying, did you ever see a UFO or
No.
anything
No,
pertaining to it?
nothing like that, no.
I noticed it in doing interviews with different people. There must have been something in your drinking water up there at Onslow. A Howard Hall come from Onslow, a Beal Perrine come from Monticello, a Pat Drybilbus come from Scotch Grove,
Center Junction.
and Center Junction and Howard Hall come from Onslow.
Yeah.
Was there something in the air up there, or just a lot of very adventurous people?
Well, I don't know. There was a lot of hot air every once in a while.
So when did you get married? When did you find time to get married?
The first time? Well, of course, the first time I was married, well, that was kind of a sore subject, too.
Well, you don't need to talk
No,
about
I was
it.
just going to say, I was married in 1940, and when I told you about enlisting in the Air Force Reserve, this Bill Thompson and I, we were good buddies from way back. He was at the seed company, too, and, of course, we grew up together. And so we enlisted in the Air Force Reserve, and our wives didn't know it. we are going to learn to fly. Well, that went over like a lead balloon too, you know. But the only good part about that marriage was the fact that I had a son. And if I hadn't had him, I wouldn't have these grandchildren and these great-grandchildren. And so, after all, it wasn't all bad.
Is your son still living?
Oh, yes, he's a dentist down in Oklahoma City.
Mm-hmm.
He's in the university, at the University of Oklahoma Dental College down there.
Did he ever have any interest in flying like his dad?
No.
Never did. Did you ever have the opportunity to take him with you when you flew?
Oh, sure, we did. We flew. Of course, he was not too excited about that, but he came and spent a lot of time with me at the airport during the summer and the likes, you know, even at Hunter Field and there. And then after he graduated from dental college down at Iowa, he went up to Rock Rapids up in the northwest part of the state, and he had his practice there. And that's where this little feller that just came into Cedar Rapids here a while back on his first solo cross country, he got his first airplane ride. He probably was three or 4 years old, and he was sitting on his dad's lap. Well, when you take off, you fly out to a certain altitude and clear your area and start to turn. And I'll never forget it. I got up there and I leveled off and looked around and started this turn, and Papa, this darn thing's going crooked. I'm telling you, I'd never forget it. And every once in a while I have to mention that to him.
I noticed that small model of an airplane over there. Can you tell us, you had mentioned the fact that is the type that Jim Watham?
This airplane here is a Beechcraft Bonanza.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can note on there, it's N311JW, and that was Jim's airplane. The picture, his airplane was white and red, just like this, and his N number was N311 Jim Watham, and he cooked that one up himself. And one of our old buddies made this for me and gave it to me. It's from them by Royal Matthews, but he's gone now, and like so many of them are, you know. Did you get?
Yes, I did. Thank you.
But I keep that right there where I can look at it.
And the teddy bear, does that have a story behind it? Is that
Well,
your...
this I got from the.
Pick it
Can
up.
you see that bear down here?
Yep.
This I got for this grandson that just had his first solo cross country. Maybe by now he might even have his private license. But it says on there, "Love is in the air," and you can see his goggles and the likes of that.
How old is your grandson?
Well, let's see, 66. He'd be 35 years old.
35. Does he Does he know of all the things his...
Oh, he's heard about it. But he's wanted to learn to fly. He has wanted to learn to fly for years.
Did you ever give him any encouragement?
I sure, but his wife, ooh, no, you're not learning to fly. Well, he had himself in a position financially where he could do it. See, he'd been a treasury analyst in the LaSalle Bank there in Chicago for quite some time, and he did well, and he's upgraded himself to another company, and he just like he told me one day, he said, well, I had a mutual fund that was making a lot of money, and he told me, he said, you remind Dad when he gets this to remember us kids. And so it wasn't long, he said, oh, forget it. He said, by the time he gets that, I'm going to be a millionaire anyway. He said, it doesn't make any difference. But so he told his wife, well, I'm going to learn to fly. All right, she said, I've said no all of this time, so you go ahead and learn to fly. I'll get me a boyfriend. I said, Chris, you don't think she'll do that, do you? No, he said, I don't think she'll do that. But I had talked to her and everything, and I told her, I said, Dina, you're in much more trouble just driving to and from work every day. She's the vice president of their trucking company. And I said, than we are ever flying. I said, you know what we always used to say? That we would make flying safe when we could find a safe way to get people to and from the airport. And so that helped her a bit. But she hasn't racked, but she's just sure that he was going to leave she and the boys by flying. He'd get killed or something. So I'm going to give that to him. He doesn't know I've got this, but this is going to be for him.
Did you mention earlier that your wife, she was a nurse?
No. I have a niece that is a nurse.
A nurse, okay. And then I had a notation here that somebody was the office girl at Watham.
Yeah.
Would have been your niece?
No. The office girl at Watham, she had worked over at, see, what I'm thinking about, I don't know just exactly what we're talking about. I don't know where the nurse comes in there.
I don't either. I lost my train of thought, and I just had a note here. We'll pass over that. In all the years you flew, Harold, did you ever have any white knuckle experiences you thought you may never get to enjoy retirement, or?
Oh, it's possible. I'm flying over
any
Chicago.
That scared you bad?
What scared me?
That scared you bad, yeah.
Oh, I needed my pants clean.
That's good enough. What caused it?
Well, I'm flying over Chicago one night. I'm up about 10,000 feet, and I'm going to Grand Rapids, Michigan. Well, we never flew over the lake unless we had a big altitude that we knew we could hit land if something went by. So I'm just going across the lower end down there, and a rocker arm broke from the cylinder and went right through the cowl of the airplane, and brother, I'm telling you, just scared the living daylights out of me. And at night to boot, but the weather was good. And so I just got on the radio right away. I'd already been talking to, this was at Midway when they were prominent before O'Hare, and they said, well, you're cleared. It's all yours. Just straight in from wherever you are, just hope you make it. And that thing was vibrating and carrying on, but I made it.
Did this make a very loud noise when that?
It did when it happened. You bet it did. But it run pretty rough after that with that one gone. But I made it, and that scared the daylights out of me. One of the biggest scares though I had, I'm coming home from down in Kansas. We had a couple of cattle buyers that we flew down there and around to buy cattle. And they're in the back seat asleep, and it's a beautiful day. The sun is shining, and we're up there where it's perfectly smooth. And I was about half asleep, wasn't paying any attention to anything around me, and all of a sudden, I'm telling you, you never heard such a racket in your life. A 4-engine bomber must have just about clipped us right over the top of us when that happened. And there he was, right out there, going away from us. Oh, brother, I'm telling you, they come up out of there too, wondering what the heck that was. That really scared me, because that was close. Now, there was a case where that pilot wasn't paying any attention to where he was or where he was going or anything else, unless he might have just did it to pull something. I don't know. I don't know.
When flying those long trips, I suppose that you had a tendency, after so many hours, you probably, it becomes so commonplace, you found yourself just daydreaming, and or did you try to keep yourself constantly alert in looking for other aircraft?
I always tried to look and see what there is about me and the likes of that. This time, I was a little lax. Like I said, I should have seen him. I should have seen him off there, because I'm back here, he's flying here, and I should have seen him, but I didn't.
What's your personal feeling about this incident that just happened over in China?
Oh, that's one of those things that they would blame us or the pilots of the big airplane, but no way in the world could they be to blame, because they can't run down a fighter.
A big one can't outmaneuver a small one?
No way, shape, or form. And the fighter, of course, they claimed that he had been underneath them and on top of them and around, and the likes. And there'd be no way that big airplane could attack the fighter.
What's bad about it, though, is a lot of people don't understand that.
Well,
a lot of people would probably think, yeah, we probably had something to do with it, but like you say, there's no way a big one could outmaneuver a smaller plane.
But they would tend to blame us anyway, right or wrong,
If you had to do things over, Harold, in your life, would you do anything different?
Yeah, I would. I wouldn't. After the war, we were footloose and fancy free because I had been divorced. And so we had our own Flyers Club at the airport, and I'm telling you, it was well stocked with everything that we needed to party. And so we partied. And of course, I took my last drink the first day of 1958. And it's a good thing I did, because I wouldn't be alive today. I quit smoking in '66, the February in '66. And I wouldn't have done the things that I did as far as drinking and the likes of that if I had it to do over again.
Yeah. Was this a type of a club, or just a group of 80 aviators that like to get together for a good time? And
it was just ours. We called it our flying club, and like I said, we liked to party, and we did too much of it.
Yeah. Before we close, is there any words of wisdom you'd like to pass on to your grandson, who will probably see this tape many times over?
Oh, well, he knows that we've always stressed safety in flying. And I stress that to his wife. He isn't the type of person that's going to go out here and do anything recklessly. I mean, he will tend to business. And when he flew in the other day, everything was just perfect. And I mean, then after he got in, then I took him down to Perkins, and we had a big feed, and then I took him back to the airport, and all of his planning, his flight planning, and his checking of his aircraft and everything, he didn't miss one thing. I didn't say a word, I just watched him. But everything was just right down. Well, he's a smart lad anyway. I mean, he knows what he's doing.
I imagine that made you pretty proud.
Oh, yeah. I signed his logbook.
Yeah.
See, you have to get your logbook signed. And I signed it and used my C number, 208618, that he had arrived solo, cross-country in Cedar Rapids. So that was good for both of us.
You had mentioned the fact, I don't want to seem like we're jumping around in this, but you had mentioned the fact that Dan Hunter used to fly Howard Hall out to Onslow.
Mm-hmm.
Is were you of the age, or the neighbor kids, they would all run out and see the plane and watch it land?
As a matter of fact, from my folks' service station and the home right beside it, right across the street was this big pasture that belonged to Jim Kennedy. And of course, they had made the arrangements that they were going to come down and fly, so the cattle and the horses and the likes were out of that pasture. He landed right there, just right across the street from us. And sure, we was over the fence and was out there when they got there. And I remember when, as we were kids, when Dan had that thing fired up and get ready to take off with Mrs. Lamy, and then we're out there, you know, we're behind there, and we've got our coats and shirts and stuff in the breeze, and that's just like it was yesterday. But all the kids in town were there, and some of the older folks too.
Was you any relation of Howard's? Howard Hall's?
We were distantly related.
Distantly related?
Yeah.
And you were on a first name basis, or?
Oh yeah. I used to fly Howard on charter trips and the likes of that, you know.
Before he had his own plane and pilot?
Mm-hmm. You bet. You see, Bob Ray, he had been a pilot in the service, and Jim got him a job with Howard flying. Jim sold, manufacturing a new twin Beech. Before that, you know, they had a twin-engine Cessna, and they had that accident, you know, down east of here, and the pilot was our chief pilot at the flying service.
Was his name Frazee?
No, good Lord. You know, every once in a while, I go blank. Now, this is terrible.
Well, maybe it will come to you, but go on with your experiences with Howard, flying Howard around.
Well, of course, there's just nothing more than charter trips and the likes of that, you know. And when they had this twin-engine airplane before they got the Beech, and after they got this new airplane, then Jim got Bob Ray the job of flying that. I soloed Bob Ray's wife as a student.
Really?
I couldn't get her soloed because she always wanted me to fly around with her another time or two. And one day I had her pull off to the side of the runway, and now I said, Marie, you're going to fly solo. Fly around with me one more time. She said, and I'll do it. I said, I've been doing that for hours. And I said, now, if you want to fly solo, you go fly solo. If you don't, just taxi this airplane up there to the line, put it on the line, tie it down, and go home. Because I said, I'm getting sick of this. And so she said, well, okay. So she got ready to go, and she looked at me and she said, well, here I go to kill myself. I said, no, you're not going to kill yourself. And she did a good job. Yeah.
Did Howard Hall, did he ever ask to ride in the cockpit with you, or?
Well, he always sat up front, but I don't. No, I don't ever know of him.
Did he ever show an interest in flying, like he'd like to learn how to fly? Or
not to my knowledge.
Did you ever try to teach him any of your tricks, or?
No.
Oh well, I didn't mean tricks. I mean.
No.
Did you find Howard to be a very likable person?
Oh, he was a wonderful person. He really was. It's just
And
like
did he treat you as such too? That
oh yeah, like I said, he always called me cousin. Hi, cuz. And that's the way it was. But like I say, what the heck? It wasn't close enough. I'd like to say, come on, Howard, don't forget me now one of these days. But anyway, to tell you a little bit more, this thing is it running?
Yes.
Oh. Well, I don't know.
go ahead.
No, I don't know about that, because this, if this is something that I wouldn't want to say this if it's running, because
Harold, the History Center wants to thank you for sharing your memories with us, and
Well,
we're very grateful.
I hope that it will be something that could be used.
May you.
Like I said, I worried about what the hell ever I could tell him.
I think you did a very good interview, and may you live a long and a very healthy life. Thank you again.
Well, let's see, is this the 12th?
Yes.
16 more days, I'll be 87.
87.
Yeah.
You're
Happy birthday early.
happy birthday early, and you're in very good shape for being 87 years old.
Well, I feel fortunate. That's like I say, I wouldn't be here if I hadn't quit drinking and smoking and the likes of that. I know that. I just definitely know it. That poor walking, he was one of the best guys in the world, but you know, he had lots of problems. And the night that he had his fatal seizure, or what? Well, actually, he had a ruptured, whatchamacallit, there I get
Aneurysm.
a what?
Aneurysm.
Aneurysm, yeah. It ruptured in the back of his head. We were walking from Bill Stark's home. We had an airman's meeting at the airport, and Jim stopped and picked me up, and on the way to the airport, he said, "We haven't seen Bill Clark in a long time. Why don't we stop and say hello to Bill Clark?" Bill Stark, not Clark. So we did, and he was home. So we went in, and we sat there and visited with him the longest time, and finally Jim said, "You know, that meeting, we better be getting up there." I said, "That's fine, okay." Bill's little grandson had came in, and he was sitting there. We were talking aviation, you know, because Bill flew with us, and then he got a helicopter and everything, and flew that. And so when we walked out to the car, Jim had just got a new Cadillac, and on the back of it was this big wheel on the outside with chrome and everything. You know, it was a nice big white Cadillac two-door. And that little boy was standing right down there behind it. He had beat us, and he was standing down there, and we were walking along, and Jim said this, and he hit the squawker, you know, and that siren took off in that car, and that little boy jumped up and back, and he finally got himself composed, and he gets back up there by the car again, and Jim says, "Watch it," and he hit that again, and the siren went off. When he hit it, I thought he stumbled, and he just went right off the sidewalk onto his hands and knees and rolled over, and that was it.
That was it.
I mean, of course, he lived until the next day, but they kept him alive. But see, I thought he was having a heart attack. I gave him some CPR, and Bill had a hold of his, checking his pulse, and he said, "Whatever you're doing, I'm getting some pulse." And so I had his wife, she was standing, I just hollered at her, "My God, call 911 and get him out here right away," because I couldn't get anything from him, period. And so they came, and they took him to the hospital, and I went behind. I just jumped in his car and drove him back. Of course, I'd had her call the sisters and let them know that we was taking the brother to the hospital. And so after a while, well, they came down, and Dr. Pavandi came down, and he said, "It's not his heart." And he said, "They're still doing some checking here to find out what the problem is." And it wasn't long until the doctor came in and told us what it was. And he said, "You might as well know, he'll never walk again, he'll never talk again, or anything." He said, if he survives. And so the son, Jim's son, John, was, he had managed the Kansas City Royals, you know, for quite some time. But he was a coach for the California Angels at that time, and I got a hold of him out there, and he said, "I'll get the first plane out of here that I can," and so he let me know that he was going to be in here about 9 o'clock the next morning. I picked him up and got to the hospital. Well, Jim had a living will and the likes of that, and all of that information was in Kansas City. So John called the attorney and everybody down there that needed to be, and they sent the information up from there to here. And as soon as that came, they decided that they'd just take the equipment off, and they took that off at 6 o'clock, and I think at 10 minutes or so after 6, he was gone.
Yeah. What year was that?
92.
92, and how old was he?
He was 80.
80 years old.
You know, his birthday was July the 8th. And July the 8th of that year, he called and he said, I want you and Alma to meet us out at the lighthouse. It was his birthday. And so his sisters would be there, and his older sister, Dorothy, her daughter, married Lupe, and so she and Lupe would be there. And so we met them out there. And so it came time for the lady to come around, and if anybody wanted anything to drink, and I told you I took my last drink the first day of 1958. Well, that as far as alcohol, whiskey or beer or anything like that, but that's another story. I do drink a glass of wine. And so when she asked, and some of the rest of them ordered, and I said, I'll have a glass of Chablis wine. And Jim looked over there at me, because he hadn't had a drink since 1952. But man, I'm telling you, they used to say that he and I accidentally spilled more booze than anyone ever drank. But anyway, he said, by golly, I think I'll try one of those. And so she brought 2 glasses of Chablis wine, and he picked up his glass. He said, well, old buddy, it's been a long time since we've had a drink together, but we're going to have one tonight. Wow. And that was July the 8th. And August 11th, he was gone. It was the 10th of August, the night that it happened, and then the 11th that he was gone. That was a bad summer for me, because Alma's brother, my brother-in-law, he passed away July the 10th. Jim passed away August 11th. My brother passed away September the 20th. So that was a bad year for me.
You led a good life, didn't you?
Yeah, we had a lot of fun. I'm telling you, that Jim, he could handle an airplane like nobody else I ever knew.
Second nature.
He always told me, he said, you've got good coordination, and I did. I mean, I felt at home in an airplane, but it was just so easy for him. I mean,
natural.
Effortlessly. And it just, man, I'm telling you, he just did. And aerobatics, man, could he fly aerobatics. Just rolls and everything, and just nothing to it. Yeah.
That was a very nice memorial you just said to him. Thank you very much for that story.
Yeah, well, I tell you, he was quite a guy.
Are you?
Wrap it up.
Well, thank you again, Harold,
Well,
very much.
You're sure welcome. I hope that it's worthy of something.
It will
Very
be.
well.
I think we could spend another hour at this, but thank you very much from the History Center.
Okay, we'll talk about me drinking that wine after I told you that I hadn't had a drink since the first day of '58. And this old buddy, the mail carrier that I told you about, I was at his place, and I just made up my mind that January 1st, I'm done. That's a New Year's resolution. He said, you can't do it on New Year's Eve. He said, we have always watched the Rose Bowl. We've always had plenty to drink and eat. So he said, you do it after the Rose Bowl, and we're drinking there. He said, then by God, don't do it at all. So I finally told him I would. I said, okay, I will. And so that was when I had my last drink. And I also promised him if I ever took another drink, I'd take it with him. And he didn't live too much longer after that, so I didn't have to worry about drinking. But my wife's father down at Swisher made the best wine. I'm telling you, it was just delicious. If you came to his house to visit, he would get you seated. Then he would go to the refrigerator and he'd bring out a jug of his wine. He'd pour everybody a little glass of wine. I wouldn't drink it. He'd cry. That went on for quite some time.
What was his name?
Bill Servicek. And finally, we got home one night, and Alma, his daughter, said, you know, it wouldn't hurt you to take a drink of Dad's wine and think how much good it would do him. Well, I said, maybe it wouldn't hurt me, but what if it did and things went to hell? Then what would you say? And she said, well, I know better. She said, you've got more willpower than anyone I've ever known. She said, you quit drinking, you quit smoking, and she said, anybody that can do the things that you've done and stick with it. She said, I don't worry about you having a glass of wine. So I said, okay, I'll give her a try. So I drank a glass of his wine, just tickled the hell out of him. And so I got to thinking, well, what the hell, if I'm going to have a glass of wine, I might just as well have a glass of wine. Well, I'd seen where Amana, and every time that we'd been out there to eat in the lakes, they had what they called the Amana cocktail. And that was grape and pie stingle mixed. And so I tried that. It tasted pretty good. So I got me a bottle of each and mixed them when I wanted a glass of wine. Well, then I got to thinking, Jesus, every time I want wine, I got to go clear to Amana to get it. And so I started just mixing wine, and I finally come up with a Mogan David 2020 and a Virginia Dare white wine that was pretty good. And so I mixed that. Anytime I wanted wine, that's what I had. And then Alma's cousin up in Independence, we went up there one day, and he said, I got a new wine for you to mix. I said, oh, yeah? Yeah. He said, here, he said, I've even got a bottle for you. And it was Myers. It's called Myers Light and Delicate. Myers Light and Delicate American White Catawba wine. And so I tried that, and hell, it was even better than that Virginia Dare. So I've been mixing that ever since.
Thank you, Harold.
Yeah.
Very much.